welcome to all. I am happy to animate this webinar entitled The Impostor Syndrome and Other Inner Obstacles, and to take part in the Knowledge Transfer webinar series organized by Global Thinkers Forum as part of its mentoring programs. At some point in our lives, most of us have encountered feelings of doubt and even unworthiness. But when our accomplishments and performance are a result of our knowledge, skills, hard work, and long preparations, and we still feel inadequate, we are probably experiencing what we call imposter syndrome. In this webinar, we will discover together what is the imposter syndrome, why is it called that way, why it is important to pay attention to our language choices, whether we're talking to others or in our inner talk, what are the different types of imposter syndrome, who experience it the most, and what are the best tips to overcome it. I really hope you will enjoy the talk and you will benefit from it. Let me start by sharing my screen with you. I got lucky. I don't belong here. It is just a matter of time before everyone finds out that I'm a fraud. Does this sound familiar? Have you experienced this phenomenon? The answer is yes if you find your own success or the praise others give you uncomfortable. If you apologize for yourself when you didn't actually do something wrong, if you hold yourself to impossibly high standards, if your fear of failure is paralyzing you, if you avoid expressing confidence because you think people will see it as overcompensating, if you are convinced you're not enough, if you feel like you got lucky when you actually worked hard for your achievement. As a brief introduction to imposter syndrome, let's watch together this short video.
Even after writing 11 books and winning several prestigious awards, Maya Angelou couldn't escape the nagging doubt that she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. Albert Einstein experienced something similar. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much attention as it had received. Accomplishments at the level of Angelou's or Einstein's are rare, but their feeling of fraudulence is extremely common. Why can't so many of us shake feelings that we haven't earned our accomplishments, or that our ideas and skills aren't worthy of others' attention? Psychologist Pauline Rose Clance was the first to study this unwarranted sense of insecurity. In her work as a therapist, she noticed many of her undergraduate patients shared a concern. Though they had high grades, they didn't believe they deserved their spots at the university. Some even believed their acceptance had been an admissions error. While Clance knew these fears were unfounded, she could also remember feeling the exact same way in graduate school. She and her patients experienced something that goes by a number of names: imposter phenomenon, imposter experience, and imposter syndrome. Together with colleague Suzanne Imes, Clance first studied imposterism in female college students and faculty. Their work established pervasive feelings of fraudulence in this group. Since that first study, the same thing has been established across gender, race, age, and a huge range of occupations, though it may be more prevalent and disproportionately affect the experiences of underrepresented or disadvantaged groups. To call it a syndrome is to downplay how universal it is. It's not a disease or an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem. Where do these feelings of fraudulence come from? People who are highly skilled or accomplished tend to think others are just as skilled. This can spiral into feelings that they don't deserve accolades and opportunities over other people. And as Angelou and Einstein experienced, there's often no threshold of accomplishment that puts these feelings to rest. Feelings of imposterism aren't restricted to highly skilled individuals either. Everyone is susceptible to a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance, where we each doubt ourselves privately, but believe we're alone in thinking that way, because no one else voices their doubts. Since it's tough to really know how hard our peers work, how difficult they find certain tasks, or how much they doubt themselves, there's no easy way to dismiss feelings that we're less capable than the people around us. Intense feelings of imposterism can prevent people from sharing their great ideas or applying for jobs and programs where they'd excel. At least so far, the most surefire way to combat imposter syndrome is to talk about it. Many people suffering from imposter syndrome are afraid that if they ask about their performance, their fears will be confirmed. And even when they receive positive feedback, it often fails to ease feelings of fraudulence. But on the other hand, hearing that an advisor or mentor has experienced feelings of imposterism can help relieve those feelings. The same goes for peers. Even simply finding out there's a term for these feelings can be an incredible relief. Once you're aware of the phenomenon, you can combat your own imposter syndrome by collecting and revisiting positive feedback. One scientist who kept blaming herself for problems in her lab started to document the causes every time something went wrong. Eventually, she realized most of the problems came from equipment failure and came to recognize her own competence. We may never be able to banish these feelings entirely, but we can have open conversations about academic or professional challenges. With increasing awareness of how common these experiences are, perhaps we can feel freer to be frank about our feelings and build confidence in some simple truths. You have talent, you are capable, and you belong. Everyone can use a little extra kick of confidence sometimes. Find out some tips and tricks for boosting yours with this video.
Imposter syndrome is thus a psychological phenomenon in which people are unable to internalize their accomplishments. It is the idea that you have only succeeded due to luck and not because of your talent or qualifications. It can apply to anyone who isn't able to internalize and own their successes. This psychological phenomenon reflects a belief that you are an inadequate and incompetent failure despite evidence that indicates you are skilled and quite successful. Kate Adkin is an expert, speaker, and researcher in imposter syndrome. She points out that the imposter syndrome isn't a mental health condition and should in fact be termed imposter phenomenon, as the experiences are not constant but situational and vary widely from person to person. She insists that it is also more accurate to refer to imposter syndrome as experiencing the syndrome rather than suffer from imposter syndrome. Researchers suggest that there are some common symptoms which include sometimes high levels of anxiety, doubting one's achievement, frustration, and low self-esteem. They agree that imposter syndrome induces stress and burnout, that it can create social anxiety, that it can affect your relationships, that it can cause you to doubt your own instincts, it can negatively affect your career, and that it can affect your physical health. Studies have suggested that 70% of people experience imposter syndrome at some point in their career, at least once in their lifetime. 70% of people. Many hugely successful people, both male and female, have experienced it while managing to build amazing careers. Famous women and men, including Michelle Obama, Sharon Sandberg, David Bowie, Serena Williams, Tom Hanks, John Steinbeck, Emma Watson, and much more, have talked about self-doubt and have spoken out about their experiences with imposter syndrome in interviews and how they have learned to use it for success. Michelle Obama, who doesn't know her? This brilliant American lawyer and author who was the First Lady of the United States from 2009 to 2017. She has said that she still feels it now, adding, "It never goes away." I invite you to listen to her testimony.
Mrs. Obama, could we quickly touch on imposter syndrome? Because I know it's something you have spoken a little bit about. There was a question from one of our leaders from Indonesia, feeling you're not good enough.
Yeah. How many people, this imposter syndrome, does everybody know what we're talking about when we say imposter? It's like,
I don't really know that term.
Well, particularly for minorities, there's this feeling like because you've been told that you're not good enough, that when you're in a room, you're wondering, well, how did I get here if I've been told I'm not good enough? Women feel it oftentimes because society says you shouldn't be doing that, right? So you feel like an imposter in your own life. You feel like, especially if you've achieved success or you're in rooms that you're not supposed to be in because society has told you that, you think maybe somebody is going to discover that I shouldn't be here, right? That's imposter syndrome. Does that make sense?
It sure does.
So what I tell people is, okay, and all I can do is tell you this, because imposter syndrome it's a thing in your head. And, it's just like self-confidence. It's just like, it's like any internal characteristic. Much of it is what you practice telling yourself, and if you've heard that you're not good enough, that's what you're practicing. I'm just here to tell you it is not true. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't belong here. And I also have the advantage of, and I say this not with any level of arrogance or lack of humility, but I have been at so many powerful tables now, right? I've been at, I've worked in every sector. I've been a lawyer at a big law firm. I've worked at an academic university, been associate dean. I've been the vice president in community development at a hospital. I've been, I run a nonprofit organization. I have worked in the government. I worked with the mayor in the city of Chicago. I worked in the Department of Planning and Development. I was First Lady of the United States of America. I've seen these seats. I've served on corporate boards. I've done it, not all, but I've done a lot. And I'm just telling you, there are a lot of people who don't belong there. And every table, I thought it was me. And after a little bit, I'm like, nope, it's him. It's this guy who's sitting here talking,
but they
all
act
the time.
So well, they act like they belong.
That's because they've been told they belong there. They don't. But there's a presumption. That's what I'm saying. It's in his head too. He's like, I belong here. And I'm like, no, you don't. So all I can tell you is that the person sitting next to you was told, based on nothing, that he belongs there. And you were told that you weren't. Both things are wrong, oftentimes. So what I had to learn to do for myself was age helps you with imposter syndrome. So I'm 55 now, and I've seen it. I've been waiting to be as bad as people told me I would be, I've been waiting for when I was going to fall and mess up and fail. I've been waiting because that's what they said. I didn't belong at Princeton, right? I applied to Princeton University. My college counselor said, that's school's too much for you. Well, I applied anyway. I got in. I was waiting for it to be hard and for everybody else to be so much smarter. They weren't. They were just told that they belong there. Same thing was true when I applied to Harvard Law School. Maybe I shouldn't be there. Got there. Nope. They're not any smarter than me. So with all the practice of just going into the room that you weren't supposed to be in and being there and occupying those seats and just doing you and knowing that your thoughts are just as relevant, your experiences are just as important, your insight is just as valuable, so that you will share it and use it and practice being there. That's the work you have to do if you feel like an imposter, because he isn't giving up his seat easily. He isn't going to just say, oh, I understand you don't feel like you belong here. Well, let me make room for you and sit you down and tell you the things you need to hear. They're not going to do that for you, because a lot of times they don't even want you there, even when they need you there. So you can't count on somebody else giving you the self-confidence. That's not how we work, And that's why you all are important, because you're not going to do that for some kid in your life. You're going to make sure that they never feel like an imposter. You're going to help them practice a different set of messages so they aren't sitting here wondering where they belong in places where we need them. We need women and diverse minds and people who think differently and have different religious beliefs, because truth and the right answer comes from diversity of experiences. You're needed at those tables. So you can't sit there wondering whether you belong, because you'll waste your time in those seats and you'll hold your voice back and you won't be able to make change because you're waiting for somebody to tell you that you belong. I'm telling you, you belong. Practice a different set of messages.
Thank you for saying that. So important.
Sharon Sandberg. Sharon Sandberg is the Chief Operating Officer for Facebook. She is one of the most powerful people in Silicon Valley. She is the author of bestsellers Lean In, Women Work and the Will to Lead, and Lean In for Graduates. She is worth an estimated $1.6 billion. Sandberg's often admitted to feeling like an imposter at times. In her book Lean In, she wrote, "Every time I took a test, I was sure that it had gone badly. And every time I didn't embarrass myself or even excelled, I believed that I had fooled everyone yet again. One day soon, the jig would be up." In an interview about her book, she said, "There are still days when I wake up feeling like a fraud, not sure I should be where I am." David Bowie. Even David Bowie shared his struggles with self-esteem. He covered his feelings of inadequacy with constant work. During an interview, he said, "I had enormous self-image problems and very low self-esteem, which I hid behind obsessive writing and performing. I was driven to get through life very quickly. I really felt so utterly inadequate. I thought the work was the only thing of value." Tom Hanks. In 2016, after playing a middle-aged American businessman who was sent on a business trip to Saudi Arabia in a Hologram for the King movie, Tom Hanks admitted in an interview that he related to the character's sense of self-doubt. No matter what we have done, there comes a point where you think, how did I get there? When are they going to discover that I am in fact a fraud and take everything away from me? Another intellectual this time, John Steinbeck, who won a Pulitzer Prize for The Grapes of Wrath and the 1962 Nobel Prize in Literature, and whose stories are still inspiring others decades after his death. He wrote in his journal, "I am not a writer. I have been fooling myself and other people." He also wrote that he admired his characters for being so much stronger, purer, and braver than he was. Our final example today is Emma Watson. The international star has spoken about her feelings of inadequacy many times. In an interview with a fashion magazine in 2015, she said, "It's something I have really wrestled with. I've gone back and quizzed my parents. When I was younger, I just did it. I just acted. I was just there. It was just something I did. Now, when I receive recognition for my acting, I feel incredibly uncomfortable. I tend to turn in on myself. I feel like an imposter." This mentality is thought to be particularly prevalent in young people, with a 2017 survey claiming that a third of millennials have imposter syndrome due to feeling intimidated in the workplace. But where did this phenomenon come from? The term comes, like we saw before in the short video, from a study conducted in 1978 by Pauline Rose Clance and Susan Imes of Georgia State University, titled "The Imposter Phenomenon in High-Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention." The study describes imposter syndrome as a term used to designate an internal experience of intellectual phonies. In their paper, Clance and Imes theorized that women were uniquely affected by imposter syndrome. Certain early family dynamics and later introjection of societal sex role stereotyping appear to contribute significantly to the development of the imposter phenomenon, they wrote. Since then, research has shown that both men and women experience imposter feelings. Later on, Clance published a paper acknowledging that imposter syndrome is not limited to women. She also created an imposter syndrome test that I invite you to make, that you can download from the site paulineroseclance.com. Why do people experience imposter syndrome? There is no single answer. Some experts believe it has to do with personality traits, like anxiety or neuroticism, while others focus on family or behavioral causes. Psychologist Audrey Irvin explains, sometimes childhood memories, such as feeling that your grades were never good enough for your parents, or that your siblings outshone you in certain areas, can leave a lasting impact. People often internalize these ideas that in order to be loved or be lovable, I need to achieve, says Irvin. And she adds, it becomes a self-perpetuating cycle. Other factors can be externals, such as the environmental or institutionalized discrimination, that can also play a major role in spurring imposter feelings. Imposter syndrome takes various forms, depending on a person's background, personality, and circumstances. According to Dr. Valeri Young, who is an internationally recognized expert on imposter syndrome, there are 5 different types of imposter syndrome: the perfectionist, the superwoman or superman, the natural genius, the soloist, and the expert. Perfectionism and imposter syndrome often go hand in hand. Perfectionists set excessively high goals for themselves, and when they fail to reach a goal, they experience major self-doubt. To find out if this applies to you, ask yourself these questions. Have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have great difficulty delegating? Even when you are able to do so, do you feel frustrated and disappointed in the results? When you miss the insanely high mark on something, do you accuse yourself of not being cut out for your job and ruminate on it for days? Do you feel like your work must be 100% of the time? The superwoman, superman. Since people who experience the phenomenon are convinced that they are phonies among real colleagues, they often push themselves to work harder and harder to measure up. But the work overload may harm not only their own mental health, but also their relationships with others. Imposter workaholics are actually addicted to the validation that comes from working, not to the work itself. To find out if this applies to you, ask yourself these questions. Do you stay later at the office than the rest of your team, even past the point that you've completed that day's necessary work? Do you get stressed when you are not working and find downtime completely wasteful? Have you left your hobbies and passions fall by the wayside, sacrificed to work? Do you feel like you haven't truly earned your title despite numerous degrees and achievements? So you feel pressed to work harder and longer than those around you to prove your worth? According to Dr. Valeri Young, people with this competence, people with the natural genius type, believe they need to be a natural genius. As such, they judge their competence based on ease and speed as opposed to their efforts. In other words, if they take a long time to master something, they feel shame. These types of imposters set their internal bar impossibly high, just like perfectionists. But natural genius types don't just judge themselves based on ridiculous expectations. They also judge themselves based on getting things right on the first try. When they are not able to do something quickly or fluently, their alarm sounds. To find out if this applies to you, ask yourself the following questions. Are you used to excelling without much effort? Do you have a track record of getting straight A's in everything you do? Were you told frequently as a child that you were the smart one in your family or peer group? When you are faced with a setback, does your confidence stumble because not performing well provokes a feeling of shame? Do you often avoid challenges because it's so uncomfortable to try something you are not great at? The soloist. Persons who feel that asking for help reveals their phoniness are what Dr. Valeri Young calls soloists. It's okay to be independent, but not to the extent that you refuse assistance so that you can prove your worth. To find out if this applies to you, ask yourself these questions. Do you firmly feel that you need to accomplish things on your own? I don't need anyone's help. Does that sound familiar to you? Do you frame requests in terms of the requirements of the project rather than your needs as a person? The expert. Experts measure their competence based on what and how much they know or can do. Believing they will never know enough, they fear being exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. To find out if this applies to you, ask yourself these questions. Do you shy away from applying to job postings unless you meet every single educational requirement? Are you constantly seeking out trainings or certifications because you think you need to improve your skills in order to succeed? Even if you've been in your role for some time, can you relate to feeling like you still don't know enough? Do you shudder when someone says that you are an expert? How can you combat this? In a blog post for Psychology Today, Professor and author Andy Molensky suggests doing your best to change the negative perceptions you have of yourself and finding solace in the knowledge that your peers may be experiencing similar doubts can be very helpful. Next time you are in a situation that feels completely outside your comfort zone, don't focus on your failures. Consider it your opportunity to learn from your missteps and to bring forth a new perspective that others may not have. For Dr. Valeri Young, owning and celebrating achievements is essential if you want to cultivate self-confidence. Learn to view mistakes as a natural part of the process. Start training yourself to veer away from external validation. No one should have more power to make you feel good about yourself than you, even your boss when they give your project the stamp of approval. On the other side, learn to take constructive criticism seriously, but not personally. Tune yourself to internal validation and nurture your inner confidence. Try to seeing yourself as a work in progress. Accomplishing great things involves lifelong learning and skill building for everyone, even the most confident people. Rather than beating yourself up when you don't reach your impossibly high standards, identify specific, changeable behaviors that you can improve over time. Here are the 10 steps she advises to follow in order to overcome the imposter syndrome. 1, break the silence. Shame keeps a lot of people from talking about their fraudulent feelings. Knowing there's a name for these feelings and that you are not alone can be tremendously freeing. 2, separate feelings from facts. There are times you will feel stupid. It's okay. It happens to everyone from time to time. Realize that just because you may feel stupid doesn't mean you are. 3, recognize when you should feel fraudulent. If you are one of the first or the few women or a minority in your field or workplace, it's only natural you would sometimes feel like you don't totally fit in. Instead of taking your self-doubt as a sign of your ineptness, recognize that it might be a normal response to being an outsider. 4, accentuate the positive. Perfectionism can indicate a healthy drive to excel. The trick is to not obsess over everything being just so. Do a great job when it matters most without persevering over routine tasks. Forgive yourself when the inevitable mistake happens, because it will happen. 5. Develop a new response to failure and mistake making. Instead of beating yourself up for being human and blowing the big project, do what professional athletes do and glean the learning value from the mistake and move on. 6. Write the rules. If you've been operating under misguided rules like I should always know the answer or never ask for help, start asserting your rights. Recognize that you have just as much right as the next person to be wrong, have an off day, or ask for assistance. 7. Develop a new script. Your script is that automatic mental tapes that starts playing in situations that trigger your imposter feelings. When you start a new job or project, instead of thinking, for example, wait till they find out I have no idea what I'm doing, try thinking, everyone who starts something new feels off base in the beginning. I may not know all the answers, but I'm smart enough to find them out. 8. Visualize success. Do what professional athletes do. Spend time beforehand picturing yourself making a successful presentation or calmly posing your question in class. It sure beats picturing impending disaster and will help with performance-related stress. 9. Reward yourself. Break the cycle of continually seeking recognition and then dismissing validation outside of yourself by learning to pat yourself on the back. And finally, fake it until you make it. By this we mean learn to do what many high achievers do. Don't wait until you feel confident to start putting yourself out there. Courage comes from taking risks. Change your behavior first and allow your confidence to build. Is beating imposter syndrome harder today than before? Jean Croteau is a writer, editor, and a psychology professor. She wrote, "Social media has allowed us to connect with the world around us in ways that we could have never imagined just a couple decades ago. But it has also created a host of new problems. One of the biggest complaints many people have, especially in this age of influencers, is that our online lives can seem shallow and fake. When we only showcase our best moments, it can give the impression that our lives are better than they actually are. This, of course, can feed into feelings associated with imposter syndrome." Mrs. Croteau has discussed the implications of social media, filters, and Photoshop with her students and how it can distort our expectations of ourselves and others. She wrote that in the past we tried to keep up with the Jonases, a reference to wanting to look as good as our neighbors. Today we're trying to keep up with the Kardashians, a family of wealthy women who live a lifestyle well beyond anything the average Instagram user could manage. As a result, Jean Croteau explained, we try to create a feed that looks polished and accomplished, and we may feel validation when people like and follow our content, but for many it can feel like a house of cards. Most of us can think of a time when someone, whether it's a stranger on Twitter or a friend on Facebook, questioned our authenticity on social media. That sinking feeling when you've been publicly challenged can be particularly tough for those dealing with imposter syndrome, especially if the comment comes from someone with a well-manicured, highly followed profile of their own. But could imposter syndrome be a good thing? Is there anything good in it? Most articles talk about how negative these feelings of being an imposter can be. But when viewed under another perspective, imposter syndrome can be a good thing. This is the thesis presented by actress and writer Molly Fisher. Here are the reasons Molly Fisher offers. Imposter syndrome indicates you are challenging yourself. If you are interested in personal growth and development, naturally you will be constantly pushing yourself into new and unfamiliar territories. When things are new, you don't feel as comfortable as you're doing something you're doing for the last 10 years. Think about it. If you aren't pushing yourself outside your comfort zone, you aren't growing as a human being. The second reason she gives is that imposter syndrome keeps your ego in check. Feeling like an imposter, she wrote, can serve as a benefit because it won't allow your ego to become overinflated. When your ego takes over, comfort becomes the driving force which leads you to play it safe and avoid any potential unknowns. This way, you won't be prone to taking opportunities for granted and will be open to learning new things in order to continue to hone your skills and experience. The third reason she gives is that imposter syndrome signals that you are gaining expertise and experience. There is a famous quote from Aristotle that she cited: "The more you know you don't know." Many experts believe that imposter syndrome arises as a result of becoming more proficient at what you do. Essentially, it could be a sign that you are learning more and getting better at your craft. That's something to celebrate for her and for many people living with the imposter syndrome. I would love to share with you, before I finish this talk, some resources that might help you to learn more about imposter syndrome. The first one is The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women by Valeri Young. The second one is Untamed, Stop Pleasing, Start Living by Glennon Doyle. And third, Playing Big, A Practical Guide for Women Like You by Tara Moore. But what I find interesting is a series of websites, actually a list of websites prepared by shelfthrive.com that I would love to share with you. The first one is Life with Confidence. Life with Confidence started in 2005. It is based on personal issues with self-confidence and self-esteem. The site is packed with practical information on how to build both to healthy levels. Owner of the website is Catherine Pratt. She's a specialist author in the field, and she's truly passionate about her subject. This shines through all of her articles, guides, and resources available in the websites. The second one is Mind. It's a British-based charity. It has an excellent website with all things to do with building self-esteem. Read life blogs and stories from those who have suffered and what they have done to build themselves back again. It can be really inspiring. The third one is Stephen Aitchison. I hope I'm pronouncing it right. This website isn't just about building self-esteem, it's more about building a better you. There's some wonderful articles and blogs here that will honestly help you on your goal to raise your self-esteem. The imposter syndrome is something that I have experienced sporadically in my life. I remember, for instance, my first book. Before the launching, I didn't dare to look at copies of the book that my editor had sent to me. I was scared, really. I was really scared. I waited for hours before daring opening one of the books. I remember also the anxiety I used to feel before giving a talk. I learned to cope with the feeling by preparing thoroughly, by always having something valuable, pertinent, and proven to say on a subject before accepting to talk about it publicly. And also, and this helped me a lot, by accepting the fact that, like everybody else, I am not perfect. This helps me a lot. Perfection is not my goal anymore. Making the best that I can is. Perfectionism can be really paralyzing, and it can hinder us from achieving our goals. This is a very interesting question because family is the first place where the child will develop his self-esteem and his self-confidence. And many psychologists believe imposter syndrome may be rooted in family background. They pinpoint facets of parenting that might instill in kids the sense that they are phony. If a child, for example, is continuously praised for things he didn't think he deserved. This might make him feel that he is phony. If, on the contrary, a child never receives any praise, even for something impressive that he did, he will probably learn to think of himself as inadequate. If a child, another example, if a child is disciplined, using language or using words that compare him to his siblings. For example, your brother deserves to go out because he ate his lunch. The child might draw the natural conclusion that he just generally isn't a deserving person. What you can do to try to overcome the imposter syndrome is to make what I call supportive lists. First, set to yourself attainable goals and write them out. Then list your strengths. Start by asking yourself some value-based questions. What are your skills? What do you master? What do you bring to the table? What problems do you help solve? Write down your answers and write down your achievements and even the praise that you receive. This will help you to internalize it, and you can revisit this list of positive feedback to souse anxiety the next time it pops up. You can also educate yourself. Start by identifying what you would like to improve on and work on it. If you can foster a sense of continuous learning, this will help you come to see mistakes for what they really are, opportunities to grow. You can also talk to your mentor about it. Share your ideas, your insecurities, your goals with him or her. They can help you find answers and gain the resources and skills to overcome those insecurities. What might also be helpful is to assess how your upbringing or your childhood had influenced your feelings of self-worth. Imposter syndrome isn't a disease, so there isn't a magic cure for it. It's something we learn to manage and to live with. The best is to try to use it in a healthy way, to learn more, to improve your skills. But don't let it cross the line into paralyzing fear. Don't let it hold you back from enjoying what you have earned. Keep reminding yourself that most of the people feel self-doubt at times, and never let it stop you from striving for the things you want. Try to tune out the negative thoughts. Experts say we have around 70,000 thoughts a day, so try to listen to the positive ones and ignore the rest. For many women and men, young and not so young, self-doubt will always be there, to a certain extent. Learn to move forward in spite of it, but remember that it is important to acknowledge it when you have done great work, and to revisit your achievements later when self-doubt attacks. And always focus on the value you provide. Don't let this uncomfortable feeling chain you. It helps a lot to acknowledge how you feel, right? And to remember that others share the same feelings. This can be a big relief. Before I finish, I would love to share with you this quote by Dennis Waitley. It says, "It's not what you are that holds you back, it's what you think you are not." So please remember that you have talent, that you belong, that you are not a fraud. You are not an imposter. You are for real. I really thank you for listening and wish you all the best.